Secretary Sarita Nair, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I just laid out some of the nuts and bolts leading into this piece on how minimum wages work around the state and in cities like Albuquerque that have their own ordinances. With you, I'd like to start with some hard numbers or some estimates. How many workers around the state right now earn the minimum wage, and how many of those are tipped workers?
So we don't keep that statistic specifically, but estimates are that there are about 245,000 minimum wage workers across the state. And then if we look at the food and drink service population of employees as sort of a proxy for tipped minimum wage, there are about 74,000 of those folks.
Okay, understood. And about how many of those are in Albuquerque?
About 34,000.
Okay, okay. Just run with me with this hypothetical for a second. If I'm a tipped employee working in Roswell and I clock an 8-hour shift, we know that the state minimum wage is $12 an hour. The tipped wage is $3 an hour. I'm making that $3 an hour tipped wage and I earn only $20 in tips for my whole 8-hour shift. What happens then? What is the employer required to do? I guess I should ask.
Right. So the employer is required to make the employee whole up to the standard minimum wage.
Okay. So that would be, in that case, the $12 rate, $96. So that's the requirement. And that's because of statewide protections, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we read stories and lawsuits related to wage theft all the time. I'm wondering, how widespread do you believe that that problem is in our state?
So last year, or we saw a huge dramatic increase in the number of wage and hour claims. Now, some of those are related to minimum wage. Some of them are related to overtime. So they cross a variety of different scenarios where people aren't getting paid what they should be getting paid. But already to date, since July 1st of 2024, we have received 1,504 cases, and we have collected about $544,000 in wages for those individuals. So if that gives you a sense of every couple months, that's the level of claims that we're seeing right now.
Certainly. Is there any reason that you can see why these claims have been spiking in the last little while?
Well, we've been doing a lot more outreach and awareness so that people understand that they do have those rights. And I think maybe 5 years ago, the department changed some of their practices to be more friendly to the workers, so that people with any size of claim were certain to be able to file a claim. But also, I think it's just a rapidly changing environment. So the minimum wage went up again in January 1st, 2023. And so, employers sometimes struggle to keep up with those changes. And so we might be seeing some of that as well.
Okay. What would you say the majority of the violations that you see are related to? Is it just employers not realizing changes in wages, or are there other more malicious activities going on that you're aware of?
We see a lot of employers just agree to pay the amount owed. So that suggests that they either did it inadvertently, or they realized that that's the amount that was owed. Maybe they had an issue in their accounting system. We do see occasionally those offenders who, it seems like they were doing something intentional, but for the most part, these claims, the employer takes responsibility.
Okay. Now, you mentioned outreach and spreading awareness of protections, but for our viewers, what are the statewide protections in place to make sure that workers are actually going home with the tips that they earn during their shifts?
So for any worker who doesn't think that they are being paid fairly, whether that has to do with the amount of the wage or overtime or tip pooling, all those kinds of things, they can file a claim. The information is on the Workforce Solutions website, and we will investigate that claim. Given the volume of claims that we have right now, sometimes that does take a few months, but we can recover both the minimum wage that they should have been paid, as well as people who violate the minimum wage or overtime ordinance are required to pay impacted employees the full amount of their underpaid wages plus interest, plus an additional amount equal to twice the underpaid wages. So there's a lot of motivation for employers to try to get it right.
Okay. Can those protections change locally, like wages also can?
If local governments wanted to institute separate types of violations and enforce those violations, I think theoretically they could.
Okay. Um, Now, the incentives for businesses to support lower minimum wage rates might seem obvious, but what reason would a local government have for lowering that rate? Are there advantages for cities to do so?
I think there's a lot of differing opinions about how wages are impacting the current labor market. So we do still have an inverted labor market, meaning that there are many more jobs available than people looking for work. And in that environment, a lot of employers feel squeezed. And one of the ways they feel squeezed is by maybe thinking, that there's a lot of wage inflation going on. So that might be the motivation for some folks wanting to look differently at the tipped wage. But, we do believe that whatever that is established, as long as it is equal to or greater than the state levels, we will enforce it.
Okay. With there being more open positions, how would lowering wages help fill those positions? I guess there's a disconnect for me there.
Yeah, I think it's a perception that wage inflation has kind of created a situation where people bounce around to a lot of different work. So when you have the floor at, $7 as opposed to $3, again, a perception that, if that floor was lower, then the wage inflation wouldn't be such a big hit on the restaurant and service industries. Now, is that true? And are the costs of paying less greater than the benefits? Are different questions.
Okay. In Albuquerque right now, the tipped minimum wage is at $7.20, like you mentioned. Statewide, it's $3. How would lowering an established minimum wage rate like that $7.20 down to $3 impact the broader workforce in a city like Albuquerque?
Well, you might see more people leaving the service industries to go to other industries that pay comparably but have either the same but fixed wages, less dependent on tips. So you might see, we saw a lot of people exit the food service industries to join the cannabis workforce. You might see more of that. And you might see other people, more people leaving for even other minimum wage jobs in retail or other types of tourism because they no longer are getting that higher wage in food service.
Now, sticking with those local ordinances for a minute, why are they necessary? Are they simply the result of the local government's desire to have workers in their city earn higher wages than they would otherwise? Or are there economic necessities in cities like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces that don't exist in other parts of the state?
I think it is the latter. I think that the governing bodies of these local governments have looked at the cost of living in their cities and determined that they need a little bit of a higher minimum wage in order to sustain those workers in those environments.
Now, from your perspective, does a higher local minimum wage affect attracting new businesses to those local municipalities if there is a higher wage in like a place like Albuquerque?
I haven't seen that very frequently because the types of businesses that tend to be looking competitively at where to site are not historically high employers of minimum wage workers. So, if you're trying to get a Maxion Solar, for example, trying to decide where to site from out of state, you're not looking at a lot of minimum wage jobs. So that's not really affecting their decision.
Okay. In terms of, say, downtown Albuquerque, where there are a lot of empty storefronts, is there an argument that having a lower minimum wage rate might attract more service restaurants, bars, things like that to that area? Or
there's no data to suggest that that's true.
Okay. Now, the current statewide rate of $12 an hour, $3 an hour for tipped workers was established through 2019 legislation that gradually raised the wage over several years. But the $12 figure that's the last step. Is the administration involved in any legislative discussions about adjusting that rate as soon as even next session?
We at Workforce Solutions have not been involved in those conversations. In the 2023 legislative sessions, we saw two bills, one that would just do another sort of set of increases fixed, and another bill that would have indexed, much like the City of Albuquerque bill, would have indexed to a cost of living type of increase. So I would expect that we would see those bills again. And Governor Lujan Grisham is a stalwart advocate for workers' rights. So we would just need to see what those bills look like to understand where the administration stood.
Just hypothetically, how would a bill that's tied to cost of living, how would that work on the statewide level as opposed to at the local level with these ordinances where there are very different cost of livings between Albuquerque or a place like Clovis? Could that work on a statewide level?
It could work administratively. We would just need to do similar to the way that we establish unemployment tax rates or we establish prevailing wages in the construction industries. We would have to do an annual process of looking at the consumer price index or whatever was the connected metric, and probably go through the rulemaking process to establish that new rule, the new wage, so that there was transparency and an opportunity for public comment, and then make that available far enough in advance of the new calendar year that employers could get ready for it.
Secretary Nayar, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you.
Thanks to Secretary Nayar for making the time to speak with us. Now, one quick point of clarification from Lou's interview. Statewide protections require an employer to make up the difference between a tipped employee's wages plus tips. Now, stay with me for an example. Because the statewide rate sits at $12 an hour, if a tipped worker earned $20 in tips while working 8 hours at a $3 an hour rate, the employer has to pay that worker an extra $52 for that shift to get the employee up to the $12 an hour mark, or $96 for that 8-hour shift. An employer can never keep tips. That's called wage theft, and we're going to talk a bunch about that a little later in the show.